Short is the story, long is the life.
Liukong's archive presents China Urban Legends, the Dazhao Temple of Hohhot.
I first heard that no one was allowed to stay overnight at Dazhao Temple in the spring of 2019. In April of that year, a friend of mine who works in ancient architecture preservation took on a project, restoring the murals at Dazhao Temple in Hohhot. This friend's surname is Lu, so just call him Lao Lu. He'd been in the cultural relic restoration business for over a decade, with experience at the Mogao Caves in Dunhuang, the Yongla Palace in Shaanxi, and the Fahai Temple in Beijing. He had a solid reputation in the field. The Dazhao Temple Mural Restoration Project was a key project under the State Administration of Cultural Heritage, with a 2-year timeline. Lao Lu was one of the technical leads. Before he left, Lao Lu called me and said it was his first time going to Hohhot, and he felt uneasy. I said, "You've traveled all over the country. What haven't you seen?" He said it was different. Inner Mongolia was different from other places. He couldn't get a handle on things there. I asked what he couldn't get a handle on. He hesitated and said, "I can't really say. It's just a feeling."
I didn't think much of it at the time. I hung up and went back to my own business.
The first 2 days after Lao Lu arrived in Hohhot seemed pretty normal. He posted a few moments on social media, the airport, the hotel, the memorial archway at the entrance to Dazhao Temple. The weather in Hohhot was nice those days. Mid-April, spring on the grasslands comes a little later than in North China, but the sun was already quite warm. There were lots of pigeons on the square in front of Dazhao Temple. Lao Lu took a photo of the flock taking off, with the caption "Start of work, good luck." Dazhao Temple is in the old town of Hohhot. Locals call it Dazhao, and in Mongolian it's called Ikju, meaning Great Temple. This temple's historical status in Hohhot is like the Forbidden City status in Beijing. It's the oldest and most complete Gelug school Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Hohhot, built in the 8th year of the Wanli reign of the Ming dynasty, which is 1580 AD. The man who built it was no ordinary person. Altan Khan of the Tum tribe, the famous Altan Khan of Mongol history. This Altan Khan was a major figure in Ming history as well. He fought wars and made peace with the Ming, and welcomed Sonam Gyatso of the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism by Lake Qinghai, thus establishing the orthodox status of the Yellow Hat sect in the Mongol region. Dazhao Temple was built under this grand backdrop. It wasn't just a temple, but also a political symbol, marking the formal conversion of the 3 right-wing Mongol tribes to the Yellow Hat sect. That's why Dazhao Temple status is the highest among temples in the Mongol region. When it was built, the silver Buddha, dragon carvings, and murals were called the 3 wonders of Dazhao. Craftsmen were specially brought in from Beijing and Tibet. The silver Buddha is 2.5 meters tall, cast from 3,000 jin of pure silver, about 1,500 kilograms. The largest silver statue of Shakyamuni in Inner Mongolia. The dragon carvings are 2 pillars with coiled dragons carved from top to bottom, spiraling from the base to the roof, said to be the work of Ming court artisans. And the murals go without saying. The total mural area in Dazhao Temple exceeds 1,000 square meters, covering Jataka tales, Mongol history, astronomy, and calendars. They are first-hand materials for studying religious art in the Mongol region during the Ming dynasty. Lao Lu's project was to restore these murals. On his 5th day in Hohhot, he called me. It was around 10 at night. Lao Lu is a very disciplined person. He usually goes to bed by 10. If he called at that hour, I knew something was up. When the call connected, he was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "Lao Yang, this Dazhao Temple project might be more complicated than we imagined."
I said, "Complicated how, technically or something else?"
He said technical difficulties were expected. Over 400 years of murals, smoke damage, weathering, flaking, blistering, all kinds of ailments, that's normal. But what he was talking about wasn't technical. It was something else. He said Dazhao Temple clears out and closes promptly at 6 every evening. All visitors and staff must leave. He understood the rules for cultural relic sites: fear of theft, fire, vandalism. But Dazhao's clearing was stricter than other places. It wasn't your ordinary clearing. It was thorough, so thorough that not even a cat could stay. The security guards would check every hall, every corner, behind every cabinet, behind every curtain, then lock up. The main hall doors used old-fashioned iron padlocks, not electronic locks. The keys were kept by the security guards on duty. And, most crucially, the security guards on duty didn't sleep in the temple compound. Their guard room was outside the gate, across the road. That meant after dark, the Dazhao courtyard was empty. Not a single person. Lao Lu said he'd encountered this before. Some remote cultural relic sites couldn't afford night shifts due to budget constraints. But Dazhao Temple receives over 1 million visitors a year, and its ticket revenue ranks among the top scenic spots in Inner Mongolia. It definitely wasn't a money issue. He asked the liaison officer, Director Zhao. Director Zhao was from the Hohhot Municipal Cultural Relics Department, in his 40s, Mongol ethnicity with thick myopic glasses. He spoke slowly in Mandarin with a heavy Inner Mongolian accent. Lao Lu asked him why no one was allowed to stay overnight at Dazhao. Director Zhao was silent for a moment, then said it was a rule handed down from above. He wasn't sure exactly when it started, but it was already in place when he first came to work at the Cultural Relics Department 20 years ago.
Lao Lu said, "So do you know why this rule exists?" Director Zhao smiled and said, "Lao Lu, you've been in the cultural relics field for many years. You understand rules like this better than I do. Some rules are just rules, no need to ask why." Lao Lu said, "Something's off. If you stand in the Dazhao courtyard until dark, you don't need any special knowledge to feel it. That place, after dark, is completely different from during the day."
On Lao Lu's 7th day at Dazhao Temple, he encountered the first unexplainable thing. That day he was alone in the temple conducting a preliminary survey of mural damage. The murals at Dazhao are mainly in 3 places: the Grand Buddha Hall, the Sutra Hall, and the East and West Side Halls. The murals in the Grand Buddha Hall were in the best condition, because the space is large and high, so smoke damage was relatively minor. But the Sutra Hall murals were the worst. The Sutra Hall had butter lamps burning year-round, and centuries of smoke had covered the mural surfaces with a thick layer of oil grime, in some places over 2 millimeters thick. Lao Lu's main work area was the Sutra Hall. That afternoon he was setting up scaffolding in the Sutra Hall, climbing to a height of about 4 meters, using a magnifying glass and a high-powered flashlight to inspect the condition of the mural surfaces one by one. The Sutra Hall was large, about 200 square meters. Rows of meditation cushions extended from the entrance to the shrine, covered with thick red velvet pads. The air was thick with the mixed smell of butter lamp oil and aged Tibetan incense. A unique smell, not pungent but very heavy. Once inhaled, it lingered in the nasal passages for a long time. Lao Lu said he'd worked on many temple restorations in Tibetan areas and was used to that smell. But the smell in Dazhao Sutra Hall was different elsewhere. The butter smell was warm with a hint of milk. At Dazhao, the butter smell was cool with a trace of bitterness, as if something had been soaked in the oil for too long. He worked until about 5:30 p.m., when the sky outside began to darken. Hohhot is at about 40 degrees north latitude. In April, sunset is around 6:30 p.m., but the windows of Dazhao's main hall were small, letting in little light. By 5:30 p.m. it was already very dim inside, nearly impossible to see without lights. Lao Lu turned off his flashlight, packed his tools, and prepared to call it a day.
Just then, he heard a sound.
He said the sound came from deep inside the Sutra Hall, not from the direction of the door, but from somewhere behind the shrine wall, where the gilded copper Buddha sat. In the center of that wall was the massive gilded copper Buddha. On either side were murals depicting the wheel of life, scenes of sentient beings circulating through the 6 realms of rebirth, finely painted, with densely packed figures of humans and animals, their colors turned dark brown by smoke. The sound came from that mural direction. Lao Lu said the sound was very soft but very clear, the sound of a wooden fish being struck. Not an ordinary wooden fish sound. The wooden fish used in Dazhao's daily ceremonies were hollow, producing a crisp, short sound with a fast, even rhythm. But that day's sound was different. The wooden fish sound was very deep, very muffled, as if wrapped in thick cloth. One strike, then another, extremely slow with about 3 or 4 seconds between strikes, as if someone was using all their strength to slowly strike a very heavy object.
Dong, dong, dong.
Lao Lu stood still. He said his first reaction wasn't fear, but confusion. The door to the sutra hall was locked. He had unlocked it himself when he entered, and he was the last person inside. All other staff had already left. He had checked. There was no one else in the hall besides himself.
But the sound was definitely there. Not an illusion, not an auditory hallucination. He heard it clearly, coming from about 15 meters to his left front, the wall behind the Buddha statue. Lao Lu stood there listening for over a minute. The sound never stopped. It wasn't hurried, wasn't panicked, it continued at a constant, slow rhythm, one strike after another, dong, 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 as if someone was timing something very important, or as if a heavy, ancient ritual instrument was being driven by some invisible force, vibrating slowly and inexorably in the darkness.
Lao Lu hesitated, then turned on his phone flashlight and walked toward the sound. His hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from tension, a physiological reaction to something unexplainable. He walked around the copper Buddha and stood before the Wheel of Life mural. The flashlight beam swept across the mural. The emaciated ghosts of the hungry ghost realm, the boiling and torment scenes of the hell realm, the cattle, horses, pigs, and sheep of the animal realm, all appeared in the dim yellow light with an unnatural gray-white hue, like the color of limestone. The mural surface was very flat, with no damage or bumps. The wall was solid, he had knocked on it. It wasn't hollow. The wooden fish sound stopped as he approached the mural. Not gradually, abruptly, as if someone had been striking the wooden fish, saw someone approaching, and immediately stopped. Lao Lu stood in front of that wall, flashlight shining on the mural, waiting quietly for about 2 minutes. No sound. The sutra hall was silent to the extreme, so silent he could hear the second hand of his watch ticking. He later told me that kind of silence wasn't normal. It was a silence that felt pressed down, as if every object in the room capable of making a sound had simultaneously held its breath, waiting for him to leave. He slowly retreated from the sutra hall. When he locked the door, his hands were still shaking. It took several tries to get the key into the lock. He stood outside for a while, smoking a cigarette. The air in the Dazhao courtyard was very cold. In late April, the evening temperature in Hohhot was only about 5 to 6 degrees Celsius. He stood on the steps of the Grand Buddha Hall, looking at the tightly closed vermilion wooden door of the Sutra Hall. The iron padlock on the door reflected a faint, almost imperceptible gleam under the streetlight. No light leaked through the door crack, which also struck him as odd, because he had turned off all the lights in the Sutra Hall. It should have been pitch black. But that darkness was complete, pure, without any flaw. He felt as if something behind that door was watching him through the crack. He stubbed out his cigarette and walked out of Dazhao Temple's main gate.
After returning to the hotel, Lao Lu barely slept that night.
The next morning, he went to see the lamas of Dazhao Temple. There were about 20 resident lamas at Dazhao, responsible for daily rituals and temple management. The oldest was a lama in his 70s named Master Danba, who had been at Dazhao for over 50 years. He had entered the temple as a novice at age 8, was expelled and forced to return to lay life during the Cultural Revolution, and returned to the temple when policies relaxed in the early 1980s. Master Danba didn't speak Chinese well, but could understand. Through a Mongol Chinese translator assigned to the project, Lao Lu spent most of an afternoon talking with Master Danba. When Master Damba heard that Lao Lu had heard wooden fish sounds in the sutra hall the previous night, his expression showed little surprise. He was silent for a long time, then spoke a passage in Mongolian. After listening, the translator hesitated and told Lao Lu that Master Damba wasn't speaking ordinary language. It was ancient Tibetan used in chanting. What Master Damba meant was roughly, that sound wasn't someone striking a wooden fish now. It was someone from long ago, left behind at a certain point in time. That point had been carved into the wall.
Lao Lu asked what that meant.
Master Danba didn't answer directly. Instead, in halting Chinese, he told Lao Lu a piece of Dazhao Temple's history. From its construction until now, over 400 years, Dazhao Temple has experienced several great calamities. The first was at the end of the Ming dynasty, when the army of Altan Khan breached Hohhot City, present-day Hohhot, and Dazhao was partially destroyed by rampaging soldiers. The lamas scattered, leaving only a few old ones to guard the temple. The second was in the early Qing dynasty, but the Qing court, to stabilize the Mongol region, soon carried out repairs. Emperor Kangxi, during his western campaign against Galdan, even stayed at Dazhao, leaving behind the famous Jade Spring Well. The third and most severe was the Cultural Revolution. In August 1966, the Red Guards in Hohhot organized large-scale campaigns to destroy the Four Olds. Dazhao Temple was the first target. It was the most famous religious site in Hohhot, too conspicuous. The Red Guards stormed the temple, pushed the silver Buddha off its pedestal. The 3,000 Jin silver Buddha fell, smashing a large area of blue brick flooring and leaving several deep cracks in its body. They used hammers to smash the dragon whiskers and claws on the dragon pillars. They dragged centuries-old scriptures from the sutra hall into the courtyard, piled them into a mountain, doused them with kerosene, and set them on fire. It was said that on the day the fire was fiercest, the sky above Dazhao was filled with black ash, falling like snow over the surrounding streets. The ash was still warm when it hit the ground. Stepping on it left a scorched black footprint. Master Danba said the fire burned for an entire day and night. By the next evening, the flames had finally died, but the embers still smoked. The few remaining old lamas, by then they had been given humiliating half-shaved heads and wore paper clothes covered with slogans, knelt before the ash pile, trying to salvage fragments of unburned scriptures. The Red Guards wouldn't allow it. They beat them with leather belts. One old lama in his 60s, who had been at Dazhao for nearly 50 years, was kicked into the ash heap. He got up and knelt again. Kicked down again, he got up again. After the 6th time he was kicked down, he didn't get up. The back of his head hit the corner of the blue brick steps, and he bled heavily. No one took him to the hospital. The next morning, when people found him, he had already passed. His fingers still clutched a piece of charred scripture corner. They couldn't pry them open. When Master Danba reached this point, his tone was very flat, unnaturally flat. Lao Lu later said that when a person narrates something they personally experienced in that tone, it means the event had been chewed over countless times over the decades, until all emotion had been ground away, leaving only the fact itself. Master Danba said that old Lama's Dharma name was Keiji. Master Keiji used to chant sutras in the sutra hall every evening, from 8 at night to 2 in the morning without fail for decades. The sound of his wooden fish was very distinctive, very slow, very deep, very powerful. No one else in the temple had a wooden fish sound like that.
When Lao Lu heard this, a chill ran down his spine.
After hearing this news, Lao Lu's attitude toward Dazhao Temple underwent a subtle change. He couldn't quite describe it. Not fear, but a more complex feeling. Like when you suddenly discover that someone you've known for years has a past you knew nothing about, and that past is far heavier than you imagined. Dazhao Temple was no longer just a cultural relic building to be restored. It had become a vessel carrying too many memories. Every inch of wall you touched, you might touch something that shouldn't be touched. The following week, his work proceeded normally. During the day, he set up scaffolding in the sutra hall, marked damage, took high-precision photos, collected pigment samples for analysis. Everything followed standard restoration procedures, with no anomalies. But he noticed a detail. He started packing up his tools around 5 each afternoon and was sure to leave the sutra hall by 5:30. Not out of fear, but an instinctive self-preservation. Like entering a room where nothing happens, but your body tells you not to stay too long. Lao Lu had been in the cultural relic restoration business for over a decade, dealing with ancient architecture for half his career, and he had learned one thing: trust your intuition. Ancient buildings have memories. If you spend time in them, you can feel which spaces are warm and welcoming, and which spaces reject you, don't want to be disturbed. The Sutra Hall gave him the latter feeling.
On Wednesday of the third week, the second incident occurred.
That day it rained in Hohhot. An April spring rain, not heavy but dense. Fine misty raindrops slanting down from a gray sky, washing the golden roof and gray tiles of Dazhao until they shone. Because of the rain, Lao Lu stayed in the administrative office sorting data from the past few days, not entering the Sutra Hall to work. Around 4 in the afternoon, the rain eased. He wanted to go into the temple to check. Rain is the most likely time for ancient buildings to leak. He needed to confirm if the Sutra Hall murals had been affected by water seepage. He walked into the courtyard holding an umbrella. Dazhao Temple in the rain looked completely different from under clear skies. The golden roof, beneath the gray sky, no longer glittered but turned a deep, dark gold. The blue brick ground was soaked, its color changing from light gray to deep black, like a huge mirror reflecting the gray sky. The courtyard was very quiet. No visitors, no staff, only the sound of rain. A schwa-schwa sound, even, continuous, like an old song without ups and downs. Lao Lu first checked the Grand Buddha Hall, no leaks. Then the east and west side halls, no leaks either. Finally, he headed to the Sutra Hall. He took out the key, unlocked the iron padlock, and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The door hinges let out a creak, echoing in the empty hall for several seconds before fading. The Sutra Hall was very dark. With the rain and tightly shut windows and doors, the light inside was nearly zero. Lao Lu reached for the light switch on the wall. It was on the pillar to the right of the door. He found it and pressed. The light didn't come on. He tried another switch, still no light. He tried several switches. None of the lights in the Sutra Hall turned on. Later he checked the distribution box and found the entire circuit had tripped. He turned on his phone flashlight and walked toward the shrine. He needed to check the most important murals above the shrine. One depicting Mongol nobles worshipping the Buddha. One of the most finely painted works in the entire Dazhao Temple, made with very precious lapis lazuli pigment. That mural was directly above the gilded copper Buddha, at the highest position most susceptible to water damage. He went around behind the copper Buddha, raised his phone, and aimed the light beam at the upper mural. The moment the flashlight illuminated the mural, he froze. That Mongol nobles worshipping the Buddha mural, which he had been studying for 3 weeks, was different. The positions of the figures in the mural had changed. He said not all of them, just one detail. The mural depicts a group of Mongol nobles performing a worship ceremony on a square in front of a yurt. On the left side is a Mongol noble on a white horse, presumably the highest-ranking person. In the middle is a crowd of prostrating devotees holding haddock, ritual scarves, and offerings. On the right are several yurts and a row of horses tied to posts. Lao Lu knew every detail of this mural by heart. He stood before it every day taking photos and measurements. He knew the distribution of damage, the locations of flaking, the areas of pigment loss.
But now, next to the noble on the white horse on the left side, there was an extra figure.
A person in a black robe, standing beside the white horse, facing into the Sutra Hall. That is, facing the copper Buddha, with hands clasped in prayer. Lao Lu was absolutely certain this person had not been there before. From the very first day, he had taken hundreds of photos of this mural. He had looked at every pixel. This black-robed figure had never appeared. His hands began to shake. The phone light trembled on the mural, making the black-robed figure seem to move.
He forced himself to calm down. He thought, maybe the oil grime had been too thick before, obscuring the figure's outline, and today's rain increased humidity, softening or changing the grime layer, revealing the covered part. This was possible. In cultural relic restoration, it's common. Changes in humidity can alter the transparency of pigment layers or dirt layers, causing previously invisible details to suddenly appear.
He took a deep breath, raised his phone, and snapped a photo. Then he turned and quickly walked out of the sutra hall.
Back in the office, he put the photo he took that day and a photo from a few days earlier on the computer, opened Photoshop, and dragged both images onto the same screen for a side-by-side comparison. The rain was still falling outside, the fluorescent lights in the office hummed, the computer screen light shone on his face. The two photos sat side by side. The left one was taken 3 days ago, the right one was today's photo. Beside the white horse noble on the left side, the left photo showed nothing, only a patch of gray-brown wall base. In the right photo, the black-robed figure with clasped hands stood clearly there.
It wasn't a lighting issue, not an angle issue, not a perspective distortion from different shooting times. That person had simply appeared, in 3 days out of nowhere on a mural over 400 years old.
Lao Lu enlarged the photo to 400%. The facial details of the black-robed figure were very blurry. After 4 centuries of smoke and weathering, the pigment layer had become very thin, the lines of the facial features nearly indistinguishable. But he noticed one detail. The black-robed figure's head was slightly bowed, eyes and brows lowered, the curve of the mouth showing a very calm arc. Not fear, not pain. It was an expression of relief. Like someone who had waited for a very long time had finally gotten what they were waiting for.
After Lao Lu told me this, I was silent for a long time. I looked up Dazhao Temple's historical records online and discovered a detail that had been overlooked before. The murals at Dazhao Temple had been covered over in the past. In 1972, after the most intense period of the Cultural Revolution had passed, the Hohhot Revolutionary Committee decided to reform and utilize Dazhao Temple. They didn't tear it down. In that era, many temples were converted into warehouses, factories, or schools. Dazhao was lucky not to be demolished, but it was painted over. Yes, a coat of paint. From the ceiling to the baseboards, the entire Sutra Hall's murals were painted over with a thick layer of gray coating. The stated reason was to cover up feudal superstitious content and convert the Sutra Hall into a Mao Zedong thought propaganda station. That gray coating covered all the murals: Shakyamuni, the Wheel of Life, the Mongol nobles worshipping the Buddha, everything. It stayed that way for 8 years. In 1980, after religious policies were restored, the lamas of Dazhao invited cultural relic experts from Beijing. It took them nearly half a year to gradually remove that gray coating, bit by bit. Most of the murals were successfully restored to their original appearance. But the experts discovered that a considerable portion of the murals had already been damaged before the coating. The Red Guards in 1966 had smashed many areas with iron bars and stones. When the gray coating was applied, those damaged areas were not repaired. So when the coating was cleaned off, what was exposed was a wreck. Later, the Cultural Relics Department carried out several partial restorations, patching the missing parts. But the work was crude, using modern paints with a huge color difference from the originals. Those repair areas were very distinctive. The colors were dull, the brushstroke stiff, completely out of place with the surrounding 400-year-old originals. Lao Lu knew this history. Anyone in cultural relic restoration would. But he hadn't connected it to his experiences in the Sutra Hall before. Now he did. That Mongol nobles worshipping the Buddha mural had also been covered during the Cultural Revolution coating incident. But after the experts cleaned it, the figures in the mural showed no significant damage. Its condition before coating seemed relatively good. So the experts didn't do much repair on it. They just removed the coating and did surface consolidation. In other words, that mural had looked this way since 1980. No one had touched it for 40 years.
So where did the extra black-robed figure come from?
I helped Lao Lu search for more information about Dazhao Temple. The destruction of Dazhao Temple during the Cultural Revolution was more complex than you might imagine. The Red Guards didn't just smash statues and burn scriptures. They also did something that later broke the hearts of all cultural heritage workers. They repeatedly painted the mural surfaces with lime water. The lime water seeped into the cracks of the pigments and, after drying, formed a hard crust that tightly bonded with the original pigment layer. In later restoration and cleaning, experts used various methods: chemical softening, mechanical stripping, ultrasonic cleaning, but they could never fully restore the original appearance. In some places, they cleaned too deep, and the original pigment came off, exposing the underlying clay plaster layer. In other places, they cleaned too shallow, and the lime crust remained, making the mural look as if it were covered with a layer of fog. And what puzzled the experts most was that during the cleaning, they discovered some new mural layers that shouldn't have existed. The Dazhao murals were not painted all at once. Beneath the topmost layer, there was an older, more ancient painting layer. Those covered murals might have been the originals from the temple's initial construction. Painted around 1580, several decades, or even a century earlier than the currently visible layer. During some later renovation after 1580, craftsmen had directly applied a new layer of clay plaster over the old murals, then painted new scenes on top. This phenomenon is not uncommon in ancient architecture. Ming Dynasty temples often have Song or Yuan Dynasty murals underneath, and Qing Dynasty temples cover Ming murals. But at Dazhao Temple, the problem was that after the top layer was damaged by lime water, the pigments from the lower layer seeped up through the damaged lime layer. Some say what seeped up wasn't just pigments. The Dazhao murals used natural mineral pigments: lapis lazuli, malachite, cinnabar, ochre. When these pigments were ground and mixed, animal glue and plant glue were added as binders. Those glues are organic. Organic matter attracts microorganisms. Microorganisms grow, reproduce, and die between the mural layers. Their metabolic products react chemically with the metal ions in the pigments, forming entirely new compounds. Those new compounds change the color and transparency of the pigments. This is why secondary image development often occurs in cultural relic restoration. After a mural is cleaned, after a while, some previously invisible details suddenly become clearly visible. That's not supernatural, it's chemistry.
But Lao Lu said, no.
If it were a chemical cause, the black-robed figure's appearance would have been a gradual process. Fainter one day, slightly darker the next, clearer the day after, like a photo slowly emerging in developing fluid. But he had been looking at that mural every day for 3 consecutive weeks. He was absolutely certain that the black-robed figure had appeared suddenly. It was there all at once one day. Not gradual, abrupt. And another thing, the direction the black-robed figure was facing with clasped hands. He was facing the copper Buddha inside the Sutra Hall. The copper Buddha at Dazhao faces east. That means someone entering the Sutra Hall from the east door would see the back of the copper Buddha. To see the front, you'd have to go around behind the shrine. But the black-robed figure in the mural was positioned so that he could see the front without obstruction, because the angle was carefully designed. The Ming craftsman who painted this mural must have considered the viewer's line of sight when painting this position. In other words, the black-robed figure's position was precisely calculated. Yet in Lao Lu's photo from 3 weeks earlier, that spot was indeed empty.
That left only one possibility. This black-robed figure had indeed been covered by something during the period before Lao Lu began his work, and in those 3 days had reappeared on the wall.
But this inference had a fatal flaw. Lao Lu had personally watched the restoration team clean that mural. When they removed surface dirt, they used cotton swabs dipped in deionized water, gently wiping inch by inch. If someone had covered something on the mural surface, they would have found it during the operation. They didn't. After they finished cleaning the surface dirt, that mural consisted only of the original pigment layer and the plaster layer.
That black-robed figure had seeped out from inside the plaster layer.
Lao Lu began a deeper study of Dazhao Temple's history. He found an old researcher at the Hohhot City Archives, surnamed Bai, who had been retired for several years and specialized in the history of Hohhot's temples. Professor Bai, upon learning that Lao Lu was working on Dazhao's mural restoration, was very enthusiastic. He compiled a set of his years of research materials for Lao Lu and even arranged a meeting at the archives. Professor Bai was over 70, his hair completely white, but his spirits were high. When he talked about Dazhao Temple, his eyes lit up. He told Lao Lu another piece of Dazhao history, one that wouldn't be found in official cultural relic protection records. Professor Bai said that when Dazhao Temple was first built, the location was not chosen casually. During the Wanli reign of the Ming dynasty, Altan Khan built 8 temples in the Hohhot area, historically called the 8 Temples of Hohhot. Dazhao was the largest and highest in status among these 8. But the site selection for Dazhao involved special considerations in both feng shui and religion. It was built west of Hohhot City, at a place called Bogitu in Mongolian, meaning a place with water. Altan Khan chose that spot because there was a natural spring, the same one that later legend said Emperor Kangshi's horse pawed open, the Jade Spring Well. But Professor Bai said the Jade Spring Well's origin predated Kangxi by far. In Mongolian oral history, that well existed before Altan Khan built the temple. It wasn't called the Jade Spring Well, it was called Chagan Hubri, meaning white spring. It was said that on nights of the full moon, the well water would surge on its own, and the rising spray emitted a white light tinged with blue, illuminating the surrounding grass. Mongolian herders believed the well connected to the underground dragon vein, a sacred place. Altan Khan built Dazhao Temple next to Chagan Hubri not just because of the water. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition of temple site selection, temples had to be built where qi veins converge. Before building, lamas would study feng shui, observe celestial phenomena, and perform divination to choose the site. According to Professor Bai, Dazhao's location was determined after repeated divinations by a high lama brought from Tibet by Altan Khan. That spot was not only a convergence point of the dragon vein in feng shui, but also the boundary between yin and yang for the entire Hohhot region. Lao Lu asked Professor Bai what boundary between yin and yang meant. Professor Bai said, "Now that you've been at Dazhao for a while, have you noticed a very strange thing? The enclosure wall of Dazhao Temple is not a perfect square?" Lao Lu thought for a moment and said it wasn't. The northwest corner of the wall had a clear indentation, as if a piece had been cut out. He had assumed it was a construction error or terrain limitation. Professor Bai shook his head. He said that indentation was intentional. According to Dazhao Temple's temple records, a high lama at the time of construction had left behind a saying, "Gods and ghosts, each in their place. Leave a gap to connect the dark and light." That gap in the northwest corner was meant to connect that world. This high lama believed that the site of Dazhao Temple itself was a convergence point of the yin and yang realms. The wall could not be built completely closed. A gap must be left for things that should pass through to pass. If not left, those things would accumulate in the temple and eventually cause trouble. Professor Bai said this rule formed a tradition. Every successive abbot of Dazhao Temple, upon taking office, would first check the northwest wall to ensure the gap was still there and hadn't been sealed. During the Cultural Revolution, the gap was blocked with bricks and yellow mud. After 1978, the first thing the old lamas did was reopen that gap. When Lao Lu heard this, chills ran down his spine again and again. He thought of the black-robed figure that suddenly appeared on the Sutra Hall mural, the wooden fish sound, the rule that no one could stay overnight at Dazhao. All the fragments, after Professor Bai said the words, "Connect the dark and light," suddenly clicked together, like a jigsaw puzzle you've been struggling with for weeks, and then with a sudden click, the last piece falls into place. 400-year-old Dazhao Temple, built on the highest level feng shui site of Mongol Tibetan Buddhism, yet deliberately leaving a corner gap unsealed. On the surface, it was to let things that should pass through. But in reality, what if those things passed through and then came back? What if, for 400 years, they had been traveling back and forth between the two realms, never truly passing through? Lao Lu stayed at Dazhao Temple for 2 months. The mural restoration work proceeded smoothly, but his sleep quality grew worse and worse. He said he had similar dreams every night, dreaming he was standing in a huge temple sutra hall, pitch black all around, with only a butter lamp's light ahead. The lamp was very far away, like the size of a star. He walked toward that lamp for a long, long time, but the lamp always remained the same distance, neither closer nor farther. When he looked down, he found himself standing on the mural, not on the ground but inside the painting. Those figures in the painting, the Mongol nobles worshipping, the prostrating devotees, the horses tied to posts, the beings of the 6 realms, were all moving slowly, like a set of gears that never stopped, revolving around the central butter lamp. And he himself was also within those gears, becoming part of the mural. Every time he had this dream, he would wake up at exactly 3 a.m., drenched in cold sweat. Through the gap in the hotel curtains came the faint light of the city. Hohhot isn't a city ablaze with lights. By midnight, the street lights turned a dim yellow, and there were almost no pedestrians on the streets. He decided to do one thing before leaving Hohhot. He went to see Master Danba again. This time there was no translator. They communicated with halting Chinese and gestures. Lao Lu asked Master Danba whether the rule against staying overnight at Dazhao had only existed since the Cultural Revolution. Master Danba shook his head. He said no. This rule had existed soon after Dazhao was built. The temple records indicated that from the beginning, there was a regulation, after dark, except for the lamas on night duty, no one was allowed to stay overnight within the temple. And the lamas on night duty had to be in pairs, never alone. This rule was maintained through the Ming and Qing dynasties, and also during the Republic period. It was only gradually abandoned after 1958, because by then, the number of lamas in the temple was dwindling, and the 2-person night shift system could no longer be sustained. But in the 1980s, after religious activities were restored, the rule was revived. Lao Lu said, "What about during the Cultural Revolution? No one followed the rules then, right?" Master Danba was silent for a while, then said something that sent a chill through Lao Lu's entire body. He said, "During the Cultural Revolution, the rules were still there. Someone was keeping them. Not lamas, those who were no longer here." Lao Lu didn't ask what that meant. He said he didn't dare ask at the time. He was afraid Master Danba would give him a concrete answer. On the day before he left Hohhot, Lao Lu went to the northwest corner wall of Dazhao Temple. He stood in front of that gap for a long time. The gap in the wall was about 2 meters wide. From outside you could clearly see the lawn inside. No plants grew in that gap. The base of other walls was overgrown with weeds, but directly beneath the gap, the ground was only bare yellow soil, as if it had been trampled back and forth countless times by something, so that no grass seed could grow. He squatted down to look at the soil. The yellow earth was dark, with a fine, almost imperceptible layer of moisture, slowly evaporating under the April sun. He reached out and touched the soil. It was cold. In April in Hohhot, sun-warmed earth is warm, but the soil beneath that gap was cold, as if something underground had been absorbing heat all along.
He stood up, brushed the dirt off his hands, turned, and left. He never went back. Later, when we were drinking together, Lao Lu told me all these things. After he finished, he was silent for a long time. He downed the remaining half-glass of baijiu in one gulp, then said something to me.
He said, "Lao Yang, the more you study some things, the more you find that the answer isn't what you imagined. I've been doing cultural relic restoration my whole life. I know better than anyone that a figure appearing out of nowhere on a mural can be explained by physics and chemistry. But you tell me it's pigment seeping through. I've looked at murals for decades, and I've never seen seepage like that. That person's hands clasped in prayer, facing precisely toward the copper Buddha, with a clearly discernible expression on his face. That's not a random leak of pigment. That's someone painting. Someone, 400 years ago, using some material and technique we don't know about, hit a person inside the mural's plaster layer. And then one day, maybe due to humidity changes after rain, maybe a chemical reaction triggered by temperature rise, or maybe nothing at all, just that it wanted to be seen, it appeared.
I asked, so who do you think it is?
Lao Lu thought for a while and said, during the Cultural Revolution, there was an old lama at Dazhao Temple. He was beaten to death trying to protect the scriptures. Before he died, he was still picking up the charred scripture pages. That old lama's Tibetan Dharma name was Galsang Wangdu. But in Chinese records, he was noted as Keiji. Master Keiji struck the wooden fish in the sutra hall every evening, from 8 to 2 in the morning, for decades. After the Cultural Revolution, people in the temple said Master Keiji had passed. But did you notice? Master Danba never said Keiji had passed away or died. The word he used was that Keiji was no longer in the temple. No longer in the temple, not no longer in the world.
Lao Lu didn't continue. I didn't ask either.
After that drinking session, I looked up a lot of information about Dazhao Temple. I came across a concept mentioned in some Tibetan Buddhist sources, Zhù Xíng, abiding form. It means that certain highly accomplished practitioners, after death, their spirit does not completely dissipate, but instead remains in the world in a special way. Not a soul, not a ghost, but the action they were most fixated on in life. Chanting, turning prayer wheels, performing prostrations, becomes a kind of trace, like a seal pressed into paper, impressed upon that space, repeating itself over and over. You can't see their person, but you can hear the sound of their chanting, see the marks they left.
Later I asked a friend who studies Tibetan Buddhism about this. He said this idea is not clearly recorded in formal Buddhist scriptures, it belongs to folk belief. But he told me one thing, in front of the Zhou Shrine in Zhou Temple in Lhasa, the stone floor is deeply grooved from the prostration marks of countless pilgrims over the centuries. The people are gone, but the postures remain.
So if I tell you that a black-robed figure with clasped hands appeared on the mural in the Sutra Hall of Dazhao Temple, you can certainly say it was due to physical changes in the pigment layer caused by humidity and temperature changes. That's a scientific explanation, irrefutable, requiring no supernatural power to explain. But if you stand in the Sutra Hall of Dazhao Temple after dark, when everything around is silent, and close your eyes to listen,
maybe you will hear a sound. Not coming from any direction, but from the wall itself, from the deepest part of those pigments and memories layered one upon another over 400 years. Dong, 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 very slow, very deep, very powerful. As if someone is there. Has never left.
Do not enter the Sutra Hall of Dazhao Temple after dark. Do not stand too long in front of the mural.
Because behind that wall, perhaps there is a person, hands clasped in prayer, who has been standing in the darkness for 400 years. What is he waiting for?
I don't know. Probably he doesn't know either. He's just standing there, standing inside that painting, from the 8th year of the Wanli reign all the way to today.
If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. New urban legend every day.